everyone? Vegan Power Strongman here. I've got a lot in store for you today. I've got a video on some of my training for North East England's Strongest Man. If you're interested in that, stay tuned for later in the video. But first up, I'm going to address some things about deadlifting, my favorite exercise to do in the gym, and my proposition for all the form police out there is that there is no single way of deadlifting. So let's get into it. So deadlifts are always going to look different. No two deadlifts are going to be the same. It's never going to be the same for everybody. And it's going to vary for a variety of reasons, not just because people do different kinds of deadlifts. The same type of deadlift can look different for two different people. And this is because there's lots of variables. For instance, the experience of the lifter. An experienced lifter might do more complicated lifts, or they might just deadlift in a more complicated way. Maybe they will be doing a one-arm deadlift like this, or maybe a round back deadlift. Maybe they're pushing the limits because they're competing. For a beginner, you might not want to deadlift with a round back, or deadlift in a way that could potentially be more risky if you've never done it before, with a heavy weight, for instance. The limb and torso lengths of the lifter also determine what their deadlift will look like and how they will deadlift the most weight. So when it comes to deadlifting heavy weights and trying to deadlift the most weight possible, if you have long legs and a shorter torso and shorter arms, you're going to have a high hip starting position. If you have really short legs and you're built like like Ed Cohen or some sort of mountain dwarf, you're probably going to be able to keep in a really upright position in your deadlift. And if you're deadlifting for strongman, for instance, you might want to deadlift with a round back to maximize the biomechanical position in the movement. You might get better leverage in that position. So take a look at Marowitz-Pudzianowski here. It's not exactly standard deadlift technique. He uses a very round back and then he hitches it by leaning back really deeply and driving with his quads and pulling the bar upwards. No one tells Marowitz-Pudzianowski that he shouldn't be deadlifting like that. No one says, hey Marowitz, I think your form's pretty bad. And that's because he deadlifts. He won World's Strongest Man 5 times. He's one of the strongest men on earth. And he deadlifts more than all the people who would normally comment. But for other people who may not deadlift that much but employ a similar technique because they've got a flexible and strong back and they're training for powerlifting or strongman or something like that, it's more common to get criticism or feedback that, hey man, I think you're going to get injured. Well, take a look at Marowitz, and he never got injured. Doesn't mean there's no injury risk, but remember, people deadlift for different reasons. Some people are just trying to look good. Some people are trying to push the limits, and for some people it's biomechanically advantageous to lift with high hips and a round back. And some people can handle this and some people can't. So I deadlift a lot like Jouko Ahola. Have a look at how he's deadlifting here. He's an old strongman who doesn't compete anymore. His legs are practically straight when he starts the lift. He uses a lot of traps and a lot of back. There's virtually no legs in this movement. Look how rounded his back is. It's rounding everywhere. It's not just a simple round at the upper back. It is a full rounding of the back. And there's no evidence that a round back deadlift is more dangerous than conventional. But obviously you need to gradually build up. You wouldn't just try and pull a massive weight like this with a round back if you've only been deadlifting for a year or two. You can see Jouko here hitch into the locked position, which uses a lot of trap muscles. As you can see here, I train my trap muscles a lot for this reason. So a lot of people say, a lot of people want to know, why do I deadlift the way I deadlift? Why does Yoko Ahola, as you've seen in the footage, deadlift the same way? Why is it that we're deadlifting this way when everyone says, hey, you got to deadlift with a straight back, you got to deadlift with a flat back, you got to get your hips reasonably low, all these kinds of things? Well, the reason is that it's biomechanically advantageous for some lifters to have a high hip starting position, almost straight legs actually, and to round the back significantly. And when people say, oh, well, it's about lower back, you got to keep your lower back neutral, the upper back can round, or, you know, your lower back should be arched, your upper back should be rounded. Well, that's actually not, I mean, look at the size of the lower back. I don't know that it's actually possible to even round the lower back in a deadlift. The segment of a lower back is so short in length that it's always neutral. Even when you're in a full rounded, you know, you're bending down to pick up the bar with a round back. The part of your back that's actually rounding is your the middle of your back and your upper back. The lower part of the back, I can't really see how it's physiologically actually possible to even round that part of the back. But if you've got any thoughts on that, feel free to let me know. But it's biomechanically advantageous. So why do people like Yoko, myself, Marius Pudzianowski, and other strongmen and powerlifters, other elite athletes, lift in this way? Why do people who are trying to hit PRs deadlift like this? And I've seen lots of other strong lifters deadlift like this. Why do they do it? Because they're trying to push the boundaries, they're trying to get PRs, and this is the best form to actually hit a PR for them. So lastly, I would say, what does this mean for you as a deadlifter? Well, the way you deadlift should be determined by why you're deadlifting, your build, and basically what your goals are. Now, if you've got really strong hip muscles and a wide waist, like a lot of women tend to, you might want to take a really wide stance. If you have if you're training for powerlifting, you're not going to use straps. You're going to use a mixed grip. If you're training for strongmen, you're going to use a double overhand grip. If you have a good deadlifting build with equal torso and leg and arm lengths, limb lengths, then sure, you know, you can probably deadlift with a pretty flat back and hit some really high numbers. If you're on performance enhancing drugs and you are competing, because of the drugs, you're going to be a lot stronger, and you can probably use a flat back as well if you want. So you don't have to deadlift like this, but let's take a look at Bob Peoples. He was one of the first people to revolutionize, one of the first athletes to revolutionize the deadlift. And that is because he challenged the notion that deadlifting with a flat back was optimal for leverage and for lifting heavy weights. He deadlifted 328 kilograms, which was a record at the time, and he was at a very low body weight. I've got a similar build to him. You can see here that he's got very long legs and quite long arms, but his torso is very short. And so for lifters that have this build like myself, they're going to be setting up in position 3 here as shown on the chart. With people who have different builds may be able to set up differently. But back then, experts would say flat back, hips low, head up, chest full of air. Bob Peoples actually challenged and revolutionized that by finding a better way of deadlifting for him. So he said, on October, I finally made a new world record deadlift of 700 pounds. At the time, I was lifting on normally filled lungs. However, then I started lifting on empty lungs with a rounded back. And that is, I would breathe out to normal, round my back, raise my hips, look down, and begin the lift. And I felt this was much safer, contrary to the advice of the experts. And by breathing out, you lessen the internal pressure, and by lifting a round back, with a round back, you lessen the leverage, all of which adds many pounds to your lift. I've used the reverse grip and also overhand grip. So if you have a build like Bob Peoples or myself, and you're trying to lift the most weight possible in a deadlift, you're actually probably going to be in a much better leverage position with high hips, with a only slightly bent legs and with quite a pronounced rounding of your back. If you're lean like Bob Peoples and like myself, you will also notice the rounding of the back much more obviously. If you built like Eddie Hall and you weigh 180 kilograms, you're just going to have such a high body fat percentage that it's not even going to be possible to really tell how much your back's rounding as well. So that's another factor to consider. So that's it. If you are a beginner, don't try round back deadlifts. However, otherwise, really, you may benefit from it if you've been deadlifting for quite a while and you've got a similar build to me. But for all the people who are concerned about me injuring myself in the deadlift, thanks for your concern. But of course, I'm competing in strongman, and for me, it's biomechanically advantageous to deadlift like this. I know I've experimented with flat back deadlifting, and I have increased my flat back deadlift, something I still work on. And if I can manage to train myself to deadlift more with a flat back, I will. But considering the leverages, my limb lengths, and the biomechanics of the movement for people with long arms and legs and a short torso, it's probably going to be most efficient for me to continue deadlifting the way I do. And in strongman competitions, you don't win by doing the safest lift. It's not about safety in strongman. It's actually about moving a weight from point A to point B, and that's it. It's not a beauty contest, and it's not about being safe. It's actually just about lifting the most weight possible. But having said that, you know, for me personally, I've got a flexible and strong back, and I've never injured myself deadlifting this way, and I don't think I ever will. You don't have to copy me, you don't have to agree with me, but I know my body, I know the leverages. I've explained it with video footage and evidence of other lifters. And yeah, so for the form police and the skeptics, or those who are worried about me getting injured, thanks for your concern. But otherwise, go out, deadlift, try some different deadlifts, learn with a straight back, learn with a flat back, and then, you know, if you're considering powerlifting or strongman or a sport like that, you know, you might want to consider deadlifting different ways. You might want to get a coach and see what they recommend. And yeah, learn the same way that everyone else does, and then find the best way of deadlifting for you. That's it. Take it easy. Vegan Pal Strongman out.